Delhi-NCR. Atul will love to have you on board.
Okay. So hi everyone, we'll move quickly to the next one. It's my privilege and my joy to introduce to you today Air Vice Marshal D.V. Court to the India Internet Day. He's an Air Vice Marshal, obviously from the Air Force, but he's way beyond flying planes now. He's now part of InSpace, the agency that's opening up India's space sector to the private innovation and startups. He spent 35 years in the Indian Air Force, flying fighter jets, being close to the edge, and training pilots in India, in the US, and even leading the Defense Space Agency. He has been decorated. He has the Ati Vishisht Seva Medal, and he also has the Vayu Sena Medal. And now, with all that experience he's got, he's channeling us into shaping India's space future. So why space and why now? Because it's no longer just about rockets, it's no longer about satellites, and it's now our daily food. It's about climate, it's about connectivity, it's about defense, it's about data. And it's one of the most exciting places for the deep tech and startups that is opening up now. The space sector is opening up opportunities for us to build global solutions, especially those for the global south. And thanks to InSpace, that door is now wide open. As in Star Trek we heard, space, the final frontier. Well, that frontier is now open for business, and it's India's time to lead. For this, please join me in welcoming Air Vice Marshal Court, who will share his views and his experience and the vision for InSpace.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes. Thank you so very much, Atulji. A very good evening to everybody here. At the outset, a word of thanks for TIE Delhi-NCR for the opportunity to be here with all of you, to speak to this very special community of industry members and investors, people who are actually scripting the future as we walk into it. I spent 35 years in the Air Force, where low flying was 50 meters. And after retirement, and my last appointment was as the Director General of the Defense Space Agency. So that's what got me deeply into space. And then this turned out to be a natural transition coming into the civilian space sector and helping to promote and expand it. And in the space sector, low flying is 350 kilometers, and high flying is actually infinity. So it is a big leap, this deep dive into space, and it's been a period of great learning. And we in InSpace have a mandate to not only promote and authorize, but also to supervise and guide and enable the emerging Indian private space sector. By a show of hands, can I know how many investors in the hall? Great. How many people from the industry, entrepreneurs? Wonderful. Great. So we have a very good starting point here. Do we have a slide changer? All right. So this is broadly the scope of what I'm going to talk about. New space is what is used to describe the contemporary transitions that are happening in space. So a little word about how we have arrived where we have arrived and going where we are going. A little bit about space technology for man. It's kind of a karma connection and is held from the heavens, but we don't realize it on a daily basis. But we carry space in the palm of our hand. A little bit about the Indian space reforms, which is actually rewriting the story of how space is done in India, and it, in a sense, reflects what's going on the world over. And then the opportunities that exist for industry, for investors, for everybody in this hall in the emerging Indian space sector. Okay, let's talk about where space is going. This is a brief overview of what has been happening since the first satellite, the first man-made satellite went up in space. That was 68 years ago in 1957. And that was Sputnik 1, a Russian satellite with only one transmitter to transmit signals back to Earth. Since then, nearly 7,000 launches, successful launches. This is excluding the failures. Nearly 17,000 as of the estimate as of a couple of days ago. Satellites have been placed in orbit. Of these, over 12,000 are still in space orbiting the Earth, and of which 10,000 plus are functional as we speak. And this figure of 10,000 was crossed last year. Just look at the numbers from 2020 to 2024, a period of 5 years. The number of satellites launched in 2020 and how it has grown at an extremely high rate till 2024. This is an incredible number. On the right, the first picture is Chandrayaan's selfie, sent to us after it had landed there near the south pole of the moon. And the second picture is about the rocket being caught by those chopstick arms, a much publicized event in the media. A quick summary of where space has come from. The first part of space activity, or the human journey into space, was actually driven by the military. Let's call it the military epoch. So historically, space was driven by military purpose and intent. The Cold War dynamics, a bipolar Soviet bloc, and the Cold War dynamics was what was at stake, and a politico-psychological advantage were also the major stakes. Driven by government funding, driven by government direction, and the civilian population and the private sector remained largely untouched. And then at the end of the Cold War, that's about 1990 and beyond, things started to happen in a different direction. A lot of the technology that was developed during the military period started to trickle into the civilian domain, and space services started to proliferate. So commerce started to take effect, and at the end of it, today we have something called the space economy, something that did not exist maybe 30 years ago. And now it's a globally competitive field. Just to look at how the number of satellites that have been launched have gone up from 1957 to 2023. 2024 and 25 actually just extends this graph off the charts. But the story is here, captured here. And that steep increase that we see is the commercial satellites proliferating by the likes of people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and the Chinese. So the story of New Space is the story of democratization of space. It's gone from government to the private sector to the common man. Today you're using space, it's in the palm of a hand. If I'm using the broadband internet on this, it's coming to me partly from space. If I use the OTT and the DTH at home, Tata Sky and so on, that's space. When I hail a Ola or Uber ride, that is space. When I use Google Maps, that is space. So space has sneaked into our individual lives, and we are using it on a daily basis without really knowing that it is so. Just look at the space market size by type. This is a 2021 to 2034 estimate. Today, if you see, we're somewhere around a little over 400 billion, and set to go to 1 trillion plus by 2035. That's a very steep CAGR if you look at it. And the global space technology market, if you look at the graph on the right-hand side, you see that most of it is already commercial. So the space economy is already dominated by the commerce side rather than the military and government side. So this transition has already taken place. In 2021, we crossed, or for the first time, commercial satellites crossed the number of military satellites in space, which is kind of a point of no return and kind of an irreversible thing that has happened. Let's take a look at how we connect with that. And this is a quote from Dr. Vikram Sarabhai, the brilliant pioneer and architect of the Indian space program. And this is it's an extract of a larger quote which says that we must be second to none in the application of advanced technologies to the real problems of man and society. So that's where space comes down to you and me, the real problems of man and society. So it's not really as esoteric as it may seem. So what is it that comes down to us? And what are the benefits that we actually get anything from space? The three broad functionalities, technically speaking. One is Earth observation, or remote sensing as it is called. So sensors placed in space, looking at the Earth, gathering data in different spectra, sending it back to Earth to be analyzed, and then the results that are obtained from that. Then there is satellite communication. Just as a figure there, about 70% of satellites in space are communication satellite. So that's where the big story is. And satellite communication is something that bridges areas of the world which are otherwise not connected, and it's a huge economy. This was the first sector to be actually commercially active right from the 1960s and 70s, and the global players have been there for that long. And then satellite navigation, like GPS, or Galileo from Europe, GLONASS from Russia, Baidu from China, and the Navig system, if you've heard of that, from our own ISRO. So that is where most of the services come from. So what's happening around us is that a whole revolution is quietly unfolding as we speak. And these great transitions are underway. They're driven by an increase in the kind of remote sensing data that is being obtained, a higher revisit frequency because the number of satellites have gone up. Why have the number of satellites gone up? Because satellites have become smaller and it is easier to launch more of them. So more frequent observations, more granular data, better analytics, big data, etc., etc. So the volume and aggregation that's available and accessible to us, whether it's the private industry or scientists, has gone up. The low Earth orbit is being exploited for communications, which was actually in the domain of the geostationary satellites. So this low latency broadband internet that is coming to us from the likes of Starlink and also the Chinese, also OneWeb and so on, which is already authorized to do business over India. All of these are proliferating the number of satellites there, and it's going to give us very low latency communication and penetration into areas that hitherto were not addressable. And today we have multiple sat-nav services. What that means is that both for the military sector as well as for your cabbie, if GPS is not working for him, GLONASS will or Galileo will. So there's redundancy in the satellite navigation and maps applications that we use on a daily basis, right? So we have ended up with user applications. That is the democratization of space. And these have unprecedented power than ever before. Add to this the combination of technologies that goes into making this special. So space technology is not only one technology, it's the fusion and aggregation and the integration of multiple different technologies. It's a cross-disciplinary thing. So you have computing power, AI and ML, the new kids on the block. You have sensors, entirely new ones, all of them coming together. Big data analysis, whole new area, right? Digital twins and simulation makes it possible for us to predict what is likely to happen, and you can plan better, prevent wastage, be faster, be more efficient. Decision intelligence and decision support services, whether it is for governance or whether it is for private industry, makes all of the way how we do our business far, far more effective than ever before. So space applications is what connects that satellite and that rocket to you and me. It's the last mile. It's very clear to everybody here that we live in the information age. This is the India Internet Day. We're talking deep tech. We're talking about India becoming a tech superpower by 2030, right? So information is everything. It is effectiveness, it is your efficiency, it is your profits, it's your dominance. But this requires the gathering of data and the analytical tools to convert that data into useful products that can thereafter be used by anybody. And the range of activities where space data can be used, and we'll have a little bit about that in a minute. So with all of those things that I said, there is even a policy support, like the geospatial policy of 2022 has liberalized the dissemination of ISRO data, previously archived and largely available only to scientists, to the private sector. So private sector entities can today utilize the data that has been lying in ISRO archives freely. As more and more satellites get launched, we'll have more and more of this data coming up. In addition to that, there is also the hardware part. So this is what happens from the Earth observation side broadly. There are different types of data that can be obtained, whether it's multispectral, hyperspectral, synthetic aperture radars, thermal, and so on and so forth. What we get out of them is on the slide here. This is where your maps come from the observed data. Digital elevation models give you contour maps and three-dimensional stuff. Monitoring and early warning of phenomena that are likely to happen. For example, flooding, right? Fires, natural disasters. It helps you to plan how you want to do your urban planning, where you want to site your roads and railway lines. Simulations help us to predict what is likely to happen if you site something in X place or Y place. Satellite communications give you your broadband communications, your two-way voice and data communications, the direct-to-home that we use every day, internet, including in the remote areas. So this is essentially what comes from satellite communication is connectivity to areas which are otherwise not connected, not with your cellular networks, not with your telephone networks. And then sat-nav or PNT. PNT is positioning, navigation, timing. This is where accurate location services come and are embedded into other applications to give you precise location, which leads thereafter to navigation and tracking information, and also timing. Timing is at the heart of every network that we use, whether it is your banking networks, the share markets, every other network, irrigation, transportation, airlines, all of that. And then there are integrated solutions. I talked about the three different ones earlier. When you put them together, you have integrated solutions. And for example, everybody's heard of the Internet of Things. That's an extremely powerful application with a range of applications that actually boggles the mind. And your interactive maps, what you use, for example, Google Maps, that's that. Remote and automatic monitoring of, for example, large fleets. We know of a company here recently we connected with. They've got a fleet of 7,000 vehicles running in India. And they're tracked by satellite, so they know exactly where every vehicle is and out, routes taken, etc., etc. So that's the kind of power of monitoring that this kind of a thing brings. So what is the net effect? It has a transformational technology for most human activities, bringing an unprecedented degree of automation to things that were only done by people earlier, reduction in manual effort, reduction in the errors that are very human, reduction in the interventions that are required by human beings. And increasing speed, increasing efficiency, increase in profits. So very, very important for the private sector and industry to adopt this. Really speaking, the range of space applications that could be utilized, whether for governance and administration by the government or whether in the private industry, is actually across every possible sector you can think of. Some of them are depicted here, but there are many, many more, all the way down to such things as education, health, and so on. Here's an example. Can you start it? With the cursor? This is how things come together. Now, this is a digital elevation model which has been integrated into a whole running thing. And this is an actual disaster that has happened in Sikkim in 2023, the South Lonak glacial outburst. The areas that are shown in red are areas that actually got inundated or buildings that got destroyed. The white areas are showing you the levels to which the inundation had occurred. So all of that remote sensing that is taking place, whether by day or by night, is being converted into this kind of decision support systems, analytics, post-event analytics, disaster mitigation measures, whether it is for the parties on the ground, for the decision maker, or anybody else. So that is the power of this converted through the software and through the analytics into a decision support system. Just one simple example, and this is a company in India which is making these things. I talked about hardware, user-end hardware, something that can be utilized by people in industry, people in government. Here's a SAT sleeve which converts your normal Android phone into a satellite phone. You just connect the two, right? And via satellite, you've got connectivity. This is already being used by our fishing boats and so on in multiple coastal states. Then there is a broadcast receiver, which is like a SATCOM pager, and there are two-way SATCOM devices, man-portable ones, vehicle-borne ones, and so on and so forth, which can help you to do asset monitoring anywhere. Your dispersed parties working in the border areas, in forestry, in valleys, in hills, in island territories, on ships, everything can be tracked. So that's the kind of power there is. Let's come to the Indian space reforms. India sits at the head table, so to say, in the Committee of Nations who are spacefaring nations. It's been an inspiring journey. 1963 photograph where that rocket payload is being carried on a bicycle to 2023. This is the launch of Chandrayaan-3. So really a long journey and an inspiring one. ISRO achieved through its frugal engineering practices some notable milestones and notable firsts. There's a lot on this slide actually. There's no gainsaying in repeating what is there on the slide, but so to say that we are in the top 5 to 6 countries in the world. We are making cryogenic engines. We have had first shot successes to Mars and to Moon, only country to achieve that. First country to launch and land, soft land, the Chandrayaan near the Moon's South Pole. Okay, so number of notable firsts done on a shoestring budget against sanctions and so on and so forth. Now this is the foundation on which the current expansion of the private sector is being driven. So this is the technological bastion, the R&D fortress from which the rest of expansion is going to happen and is happening. So that was the government-driven part of the program where only ISRO, driven by the taxpayers' money, was doing space exploration. And then came around 2019-20, the vision to liberalize the space sector and open it up to the private sector. This is something the Honorable Prime Minister had to say when the strength of government space institutions, which is ISRO, and the passion of the private sector will meet. Not even the sky will be the limit. So what was clearly understood was that there is a space economy that's already running, and India needs to claim its stake, right? As one of the largest economies or growing economies and the largest population, we need to do that. And the power of the larger mass of our population needs to be harnessed to make this happen. It's not possible to do it only in the government realm because there are natural constraints in government. So the vision is this, not stated in these words, that's my summarizing it, but it's unfettered participation by the private sector in the full range of space activities, which is huge. So from that vision, the first thing that the government did was to establish two structures, two organizations. One was InSpace, the organization that I'm representing here today, which is Indian National Space Promotion and Authorization Center. This is a short form for that. And NSIL, which is the PSU, and which is kind of the commercial front end of ISRO. It built the policy framework for space activities very, very quickly. The Indian space policy came up in 2023, the geospatial policy in 2022, the norms, guidelines, and procedures amplifying the Indian space policy produced by InSpace last year itself. So a very rapid, and then there was the liberalization of the FDI norms. So allowing large amounts of money to come in from the FDI route because we need that money to expand in the private sector. Idea was to build space sector capability using whatever finances we can, and that is where the investors sitting in this room are going to be extremely important. And using the tool of a public-private partnership, so essentially incentivizing the expansion of the private space sector by using government money to buffer some of the difficulties and challenges there. This is what the Indian Space Policy 2023 had to say. No restriction for non-government entities, NGEs, that's the term that's been coined, for any of the activities that are there on the slide, right from building rockets, launching rockets to doing everything, creating infrastructure on the ground, applications, the whole works. What's more, to accelerate this process and to enable the private sector, it was decided that ISRO's matured and perfected technologies would be transferred to the private sector through the agency of InSpace so that they can take it and commercialize it, productionize it, and expand it. So that's the kind of government vision that is driving it. The Indian space policy also lays down and delineates the responsibilities of the three major organizational structures, ISRO remaining the National Space Agency of India, fundamental space research, human space flight, scientific exploration and missions. InSpace as an autonomous body to regulate, authorize, and promote everything, and NSIL as a PSU under the Department of Space to market the space-based assets of ISRO. This is the fourfold mandate that we have in InSpace: promote, authorize, supervise, and enable. What we're doing here today is part of the promotion and the enablement part, and which is essentially to mobilize private sector funding for the space sector and to make everybody aware of the opportunities that are there. Just a story of what has happened since the space sector reforms kicked in. We had just about 6 startups in 2016, space startups. Look at the energy building up after that. As we speak, it's crossed 300 as of date. That's a 49x increase. No other country has seen this kind of a spike. What's more, the private sector space expansion and whatever's happening and the opportunities that are there, they plug in seamlessly into a number of different national missions, some of which will be helped by space sector and some of which will help the space sector grow. A number of initiatives that are there. Mission Digital India, it works directly into the space. Mission Mausam, which is weather and climate related things, which involves a lot of remote sensing for space. DigiPin, which is your GPS kind of functionality. The Krishi decision support systems for the agriculture sector, extremely important. Gati Shakti, all of you have heard of it, 1,000 layer of information upon your basic geospatial data to be used by the government. Eventually, it may also come, or some portions of it may come for the private sector as well. So many different things. And if you've heard of it, the government has become an investor in the space sector through the 1,000 crore venture capital fund. It's one of InSpace's initiatives that has worked very well, and it will be operationalized by the end of this quarter. We'll start the first disbursements of money starting to take place in growth stage space sector. Incidentally, it's the only time that a pure sectoral fund has been created by the government. So that's the kind of tailwinds in policy, in money, and in overall vision that exists today, and that's the opportunity that is underpinning everything else that I'm going to talk about from now. So what's the end result? despite this very young age of the Indian private sector, these are the kind of achievements that have happened just in the last 2 to 3 years. Rockets have already done suborbital launches. In this fiscal year, we'll see at least 2 companies doing orbital launches. By the next year, they will be commercially available to launch satellites, whether from India or from abroad. Skyroot and Agnikul, they're both represented here. Number of satellites that have gone up by Indian satellite companies, Azista, Tata Advanced Systems, Dhruva Space, and so on and so forth. Coming year is going to be very, very exciting. In just the last 3 to 4 years, the world's first hyperspectral privately owned constellation launched by Pixel India. They've got business going on right now with the US NRO. Okay. You have Tata Advanced Systems. Digantara just launched something that is really earth-shaking, which is space situational awareness, telescopes in space, looking at space objects and cataloging them. Companies that I've noted here, they've got some very exciting firsts coming up. The world's first 3D printed rocket is being built by Agnikul. The world's first coaxial optical and SAR payload sensor, a dual sensor, world's first, going to launch a few months from now. One of the first things that we did in space was to launch a long study to study the space sector and look at what are the prospects and what are the promises and what are the expectations. This study is available as a report. It was done with PwC as the partner on the InSpace digital portal, and anybody who's interested can take a look at it. It's not very long. Broadly, this is the vision that that particular report states, and this is the decadal vision for the Indian space economy. So you're looking at that first decade of 2023 to 2033 and what can be achieved. So there's a certain amount of mathematics that had gone into it, and so this vision translates to 2 missions. The first can be defined in revenue terms. Currently, or in 2022-23 figures, we were at $8.4 billion, which was just 2% of the global space economy. Really paltry, really low. Over the next 10 years, it is possible for us to get to a figure of 44 billion. There's a certain amount of mathematics that's gone into it. It's not necessarily very perfect science, but it's the best estimate that could be done. The second mission that comes out of this is to build an ecosystem where the private sector, the public sector, the startups, everybody can work together in a whole-of-nation approach. This is the aspiration for the space economy, what we call upstream, midstream, and downstream. So upstream is basically the rockets and the spacecraft. Midstream is the ground stations where the data is received and satellites are controlled, that infrastructure. And downstream is where the applications are made, right? So that's the breakdown as it existed in 2022 figures, totaling to 8.4 or 2% of the economy. The aspiration is for 44 billions by 2033, which requires an average CAGR of 16%. And as you can see, the story, about 74% of this actually comes from the downstream or application sector, which is consumption of space data by government, consumption of space data by the private industry, and also globally. The same blocks are split into the import and export portions of the thing. So the 44 billion breaks down to about 1/4 of it, that is $11 billion in exports and 33 billion. This is the breakdown. I'm not going to cover it in detail here, but what's really interesting here is that 32 billion out of the 44, or 70%, lies in this Earth observation, navigation, communications area that I covered earlier, which is your space applications area. This is our strategy, the revenue generators, the ecosystem that has to be built, and the catalyst which is going to drive this forward at a faster rate, and we have a strategy for each of these. So what are these opportunities now? Okay, here are some figures for the global space economy, right? Currently valued at about 400 plus minus a little bit, and projected to reach about 1 trillion. The more aggressive figures talk about 2030 to 35. This is a more moderate figure of 2040. So India starting at $8 billion, we have a massive opportunity to scale into this growth. Provided we play our cards right, provided we actually do meaningful whole-of-nation approach. So it's all up to us. These are the broad opportunities bucketed in 4 broad areas. Manufacturing itself, and I'm going to talk about manufacturing because we have some entrepreneurs here and we have some people from industry here. Then there are services that can be given, not necessarily hardware manufacture as such, but a number of services that can be made available. We have the very exciting thing of the first Indian company to actually build and launch a satellite, communication satellite. Can you imagine? It took us 2025 to have the first Indian company come up and do this. All this time we were being serviced either by ISRO, that is government, or by foreign satellites. Earth observation applications themselves, they feed into the green economy, the blue economy, urban planning, and just a host of other applications. And then, of course, there is the export market. International engagement actually provides a very big opportunity because we are very well poised for it. One, we have a geopolitical standing in the World Committee where we are, a friend of the global South, and that's the space aspiring part of the world. They are not spacefaring countries, but they do want a piece of the pie. We can make it available for them. So that's a huge opportunity to expand into the global South. The strategy is already on, and the activity is already on towards this from InSpace's side. Okay, so what's in it for the industry itself? There's a fourfold opportunity for industry, and I'm not talking about the space tech industry. I'm talking about the non-space industry. How can industry participate in the space story and be part of what is being scripted? The first is to be part of it as a space industry manufacturer. And there is scope here from wherever you are. For example, you could be in automotive field, you could be in electronics, you could be in materials, you could be in anything. Like I said, space technology is a fusion or an integration of a number of cross-disciplinary domains, right? So in each of these, it is possible to laterally shift over into the space manufacturing part. And there is just a huge amount of tailwind for this, a lot of money being pumped in, manufacturing clusters coming up in states. There are about 5 states right now who are looking very actively at that. And so one can actually, without too much of a leap, become a space sector manufacturer through lateral transition. The second opportunity lies in becoming, if you don't want to be that, you can be a part of the supply chain. For example, electronics, for example, sensors. You could be building something that's a component or an assembly level thing. You can easily adapt that to become space grade and become a supplier to the space industry, which is expanding, going to need that supply chain. With the expansion, you also need assured supply chains. If we do this in-house, if we do this in-country, we're going to reduce the dependencies. Strategically, that's a huge power to have. Third is to become an investor. A lot of our own industry is very well to do. A great example was recently put by Infosys, which has invested, how many, I'm forgetting the number of millions that they have invested in a space tech startup called Galaxy. Galaxy, incidentally, is the company that's going to launch the world's first dual sensor, coaxial dual sensor satellite a few months from now. So Infosys has invested in a space sector company, it itself being a non-space sector entity. So that's another opportunity to become an investor. And the fourth, of course, is that the private industry, particularly those who are working in core areas like power, agriculture and agri-tech, automotives, number of other logistics and so on and so forth, can actually make their own business and how they work far more effective by using space data. So as a consumer. But for that, we'll have to understand what it is about, understand the benefits, and adopt it. Last but not the least, like that old song goes, sabse bada rupaiya, right? So the whole story runs when the coins are clinging. And so access to finance becomes the main engine driving this whole story. This is the kind of capital infusion that is taking place from the private industry side, that is venture capital funds and so on. So far, about 300 million plus has been invested over the last 4 to 5 years into Indian space tech industries. This needs to scale up. Over the period of next 10 years, we are looking at about 22 odd billion of infusion of funds into the space companies as well as the space infrastructure. A lot of it will come from government, no doubt. But much of it will have to be shouldered by the Indian private sector, which is warming up to the idea. But what stands between us and confident investing in the space sector is simply not enough knowledge, not enough familiarity with the sector. It's a new sector to be understood, right? But it's a sunrise sector. It appears to be kind of a leap of faith. We are not comfortable investing in what we are not familiar with, but that exactly is what we're trying to do here, is to bridge that gap so that that awareness that is created, it makes one familiar and increases the flow of funds through the Indian private. And the more we are doing this is the third session we are doing, more and more investors are reaching out to us to ask us, how can we help? How can we get together? So there is something in our minds and we'll take it forward from here. Are there challenges? Of course. We have extremely good capabilities, but not enough in capacities, and the two are different. The ability to scale up into large-scale manufacturing is what makes the difference, not merely having the capability demonstrated or available in a lab. So we need to bring our capacities up by scaling up our industrial manufacturing capability. We are very smart people, but very few of them in the space sector. Most of them are spilling over from the ISRO. So it's ex-ISRO people who are driving a lot of the change that's happening. We need to create more. We need to convert existing talent into space sector talent. A lot of it can be lateral. We are technologically savvy, but a lot of the niche technology is still missing from us. We don't make certain sensors at all, detectors. We do not make the chip we don't have. So there are still certain components and things and assemblies that we have not cracked. It's time to put our shoulder to breaking these dependencies from foreign manufacturers. Testing facilities and foundries, we are short of the scale that we require. R&D, we are all aware of the problems. And of course, regulatory frameworks and policies. But there is active work going on these. And industry pain points are quickly, rapidly being addressed through improvements in that. Last of all, funding. So going ahead, what is the picture that we're looking at? The Indian space story, I for India, started with ISRO. We had 60 years of pure ISRO government-driven hard work, uphill work, and it's laid the foundations. But the story going ahead is going to be much more. So InSpace is created to enable and promote the private sector, private space sector, and to expand and scale up at a scale that has never been done before in India, for sure. Industry has been a partner right from the beginning, but the role of industry and the responsibility of industry has gone up multifold now. Industry has a role in R&D and taking it from low TRL levels to the high TRL levels of scaling up and manufacturing at world-class quality. So industry, big role. The innovator is something, I mean, we just finished in the other hall, another session in which the absolutely cutting-edge space startups presented what they do and how the space industry works. So we have the talent, but innovation needs to get enough of backing, enough of support, enough of funding. And finally, the last of the I is the investor. The next chapter of this story is going to be scripted by the last two, the innovator and the investor. And that is where the disruption is going to happen. This is what I call the 5 I's, and this is what's going to script India's space future. In summary, space applications are transformational. It's just that we don't know it. We need to learn. There are a number of socio-economic benefits. Profits are there to be had for the private industry, and it brings us to strategic and a national level resilience that is extremely important to have. We are a big country. We are the most populous. The future is calling us. Are we hearing the call? There are great opportunities right there for the taking, and we have great tailwinds. Never before has any sector has the kind of tailwinds that the space sector has been given by the government of India. Are we seeing the signs? Iron is hot. Are we willing to hit? So like they say in the forces, this is a call to arms. These are not ordinary times. When we talk about the decadal vision, this decade is very, very critical for where this whole story is going. India is placed very well, poised at a very, very strategic position right now, at an inflection point. And we are competitive. If we want to, we can catch up where we are behind, and we can go ahead where we are already ahead in the global competition, right? But to make all of that happen, it's really going to require us to come together, understand the story, and then put our shoulder to the wheel there. We have to collaborate right now. That whole of nation has to become not just a phrase to be thrown around, but actually to be structured into practices and to be internalized in action. We can do it together, and we can stand in our own way. The choice is ours. Thank you, and Jai Hind.
Atul sir, love to have you to present the memento. उधर से आ जाओ आप. Jai Hind sir, and thanks for the inspiring session. I think we were not fully aware of what InSpace has to offer, and this is clearly very, very eye-opening for all of us. Thank you. For the next session, which is again in the space side, India in orbit, how space tech is powering our digital future. We'd love to welcome Ronak, CEO of Take Me to Space. Ronak, are you here?